Hi, I'm Mario Guerra, the two-time former mayor of the great city of Downey, and I'm here with my co-host, Eric Pierce, the editor of the Downey Patriot. And we're here today talking Downey with Mario
and Eric.
And as we've been doing the last week, we've been going through and having a series of conversations with the candidates for the 64th Assembly District. It's a newly redrawn district that incorporates the city of Downey, the city of Cudahy, the city of Bell, the city of La Habra, the city...
We're going to lose a couple.
We're going to lose a couple on there, but you can give us on there. And we're here today with one of the candidates. She's the mayor of the city of Cudahy, and her name is Elizabeth Alcantar. Alcantar. And we're here to have discussions about herself, about why or not you should vote for her, and a little bit of to tell themselves a little bit about who the candidates are, so you can have an informed decision on who you're voting for. And Eric, I know you had a disclaimer you always put out.
I do like to mention that every candidate has been invited to appear on our show. We're grateful that 5 have accepted. Thank you, Elizabeth. Can I call you Elizabeth?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for being here. No, because we just want people to make informed decisions and to vote for the person they feel is the right person for our district. Right. Elizabeth, for people who may not be familiar with you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Elizabeth Alcantar. I currently serve as a mayor for the city of Cudahy and have served now for the second time as mayor for the city. Have served on the city council now for 4 years, but before that served on the planning commission for 5 years. And just in that whole time have been doing organizing work around labor, environmental justice, education issues. I like to say I didn't get my start in politics because I wanted to get into politics. I started organizing around first-generation students getting into college and realizing that it was difficult for me. Attended a council meeting because of that and stuck around.
Great. Yeah. So, Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about where your thoughts are, where the state of California is today. What would you say, or what are your thoughts on that?
Right, I think there's a tale of many Californians. It depends on who you talk to. Some folks are doing really well for themselves. They're persevering through the pandemic. They got to work from home. They're still healthy. They didn't lose loved ones or colleagues or neighbors. And then there's others of us that lost colleagues, neighbors, have been very fortunate ourselves, but maybe around us it was a difficult time. And then there's many that lost loved ones, that lost their home, that lost their jobs and so much. And so I think that at this point in time, there's a tale of multiple Californians. And so for me, it's really tough to say there's one definitive answer, but I think that there is a huge opportunity in California, and that's where we should be looking forward to. And we have a huge opportunity in this district specifically, seeing that there is an incumbent, it's an open race. There's a plethora of ideas and different candidates, and so I think that this is where we really get to, push the envelope.
This district is really diverse from Downey and Bell all the way east to La Mirada. Different demographics. What do you think is the biggest issue facing this new district?
Right, and you're right. So when you talk to folks in Bell, they are very different from the folks in La Habra, La Mirada, in South Whittier, which is part of the district as well, right? And so I think people think that the issues are going to vary widely, but when you get down to the actual nitty-gritty, you see that the issues are very similar. Folks want to talk about pollution. Folks want to talk about the environment. They want to talk about industry and how it affects them, but also the jobs that come or go when industry comes or goes, right? And so I think that that's one of the big issues. I think when it comes to education, that's a big issue as well. And do our students have enough support in their schools, whether it's their local school district or going up to college and seeing that, our students are going to college, they got the right grades, they participated in everything that they could, but they get to college and it's $40,000. And that's for a public university, right? Not even considering private. So I think that those two issues are huge for us: environment, education, jobs, and of course housing. Housing is the biggest issue that we're talking to folks about. It's multifaceted. It's not just for renters, not just for people that have mortgages and homeowners, but it's also for folks that are experiencing homelessness and that need more resources, more support around the housing sphere. So there's a plethora of issues, I would say, but all these issues hit on every part of the district, whether you are old or young, whether you have a nice savings account or you don't, renter or homeowner, whether you're a teacher or you're a student. These issues really hit home for a lot of folks.
Absolutely.
So, we were talking a little bit about housing before the show started. And I think, Cudahy, I remember reading once, it's in a 1 square mile, it's one of the most congested places in the country or something like that from a resident standpoint. And I know it's a built-out city. Same thing with Downey, we're a built-out city, if you will. How would you promote housing in a built-out community, especially in Southeast LA County, which we're mostly built out?
Right. Great question. So in Cudahy, Maywood, Bell, and Maywood's outside the district, but it's a very similar city to ours, right? We're a very, very dense community. We're more dense than many boroughs in New York. And a lot of people think of New York as this bastion of density and housing. But in Southeast Los Angeles, we're even more so dense than them. And I always say dense, but not by design, right? It's not that we're designing, beautiful multi-unit buildings like the one we talked about earlier, but we're talking about one single family home that is housing 2, 3, sometimes 4 families. And so that creates density without design. What we should be looking to is creating affordable housing opportunities so that we're building density by design versus forcing folks into homes because they can't afford one of their own, which is what happens. I know growing up, I grew up in the same place for 20 plus years, and out of the 5 duplexes on the lot, we were the only ones, we're the only ones actually that didn't have someone living in their garage. And that was because of the affordability crisis. Sure. And so for me, it's about building by design dense communities that are welcome communities. I think that's the other thing. In Southeast LA, we have such a welcoming community. Folks want to talk to each other. You walk by, buenos dias, buenas tardes, So folks aren't adverse to other people. It's just we're not doing it by design. And so that means our cities aren't built for that density either.
I was a refugee, and I was one of those when we first got here to this country. Excuse me. It was 12 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment on Miles Avenue in Huntington Park. And I go by and take my kids there once in a while and say, look, this is what, where we started at. So I completely understand that.
My family too, we were crammed in the little, my parents immigrated from Mexico. We were crammed, me and my 2 brothers and my parents, in a small little 1-bedroom little apartment. And what's funny though is when you're at that age, you don't realize how small it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when you get older, you realize, how do we even manage?
It's like going back to elementary school. You're like, really? I really went. But the same thing. You're right.
I think about it. My parents came here, and similar story, but in Torrance, it was before they had myself and my brothers, and I have my own apartment now. And I remember one of the things that I showed my mom was, oh my gosh, I have an AC. Right, I don't have a fan, because growing up, we didn't have an AC, and that was one of those pieces where it's like you made it, and it's just my small little apartment, humble apartment, but it was a big deal for our family because it's different.
Elizabeth, speaking of housing, rent control, is that something that you support?
Yes, I do support rent control. I'm the only renter on the ballot for AB 64, and I say yes because I don't think it's the only solution. I think we should be building housing, and as we build more housing, it should become more affordable for our communities. As a renter my whole life, I know that there's stories from landlords, but there's also stories for renters, and so we have to build in those protections so that we have a fair chance for ourselves as well. And we have to talk about that imbalance of power and what that looks like in our communities, because we should have accountability, but we should also have protection. And that means for one of my commissioners who's a landlord as well, she has 4 units. And she's supportive of rent control too because she knows and she acknowledges that she treats her tenants fairly. She talks to them about raising rents, etc. But she also knows that and acknowledges that not all landlords are like her, right? And so I think that that's part of it. But I think a lot of our cities talk about local control when it comes to developing of housing, but they don't talk about local control when it comes to rent control. And we have things like Costa-Hawkins, which precede any sort of rent control. And that means that there's a lack of local control there too, which I like to bring up to folks as well.
Do we have, with the state, we have a 5% now,
5%
right?
plus
the cost of living and so forth. Because I own some units in Huntington Park, and unfortunately I hadn't increased them in 5 years. When rent control come in, I had to have that conversation with my tenants and say, I'm gonna have to increase it 5% every year because you're gonna need a new roof in 10 years, 6 years inside. So I was one of, like your landlord, like your planning commissioner out there, I was one of those good landlords, if you will, but then you kind of fall behind because you didn't increase it for so many years. So that was a situation down there that, you know, you look at and you're like, I'm not sure, I don't know if that helps because I wasn't increasing it. So you could make that argument both ways. I was definitely one
And
of
I
those.
think that that's where we talk about perspective, right?
Yeah.
And for yourself, I think you speak to how you weren't raising the rent, and so
Yeah.
then that put you in a pickle.
Right,
But
right.
for myself, for example, as I mentioned, I'm a renter of my whole life, I should
Yeah.
say. In the rental unit that we rented for 20 plus years, the landlord was an absentee.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime we needed something fixing, what happened to my parents? Like, oh, don't tell him, in Spanish, of course.
Yeah.
Don't tell him because he's going to raise the rent.
Right,
And it might have been something small, it might have been something large, but
Right.
it would raise the rent.
Right.
And then what happened? He ended up saying that my parents didn't pay rent for all of 2012. He said this in 2017, which is untrue. He would have evicted us, I would
Right.
think. And that turned into him saying my parents now had to pay, instead of the $1,600 rent, had to pay $2,100 rent. My parents felt like they had no protection. And we tried to seek legal assistance, but because the laws are so loose in that regard, they didn't have any sort of
Right.
support. And so that's what the stories that I also look to. And like, how do we find that balance that actually supports our renters, while also, you know, supports folks like you? The other thing that I want to bring up is that a lot of the folks that are becoming landlords now are not small mom and pop landlords. A lot of them are large developers. And we're seeing this across the country where it's larger corporations buying up these plots of land. And that means that there's less opportunity for people like me, for people like my parents, for people like your children and grandchildren, to buy their own property one day, because now they're competing against this, you know, large developer, large corporation. And so that's what the other piece of the side of things that I think that when we're fighting for the little guys, we're fighting for all of the little guys.
Okay.
And that is no, that is an issue because, you know, I'm also a realtor, and that is one issue where you have these developers buying properties with all cash, and you can't compete with it. I have another question, kind of moving on from housing. If that's okay.
Yeah.
So the governor recently proposed his budget, and it looks like, I think the number is like $95 billion surplus
Yep.
that California has. What's your thought on the surplus? And if you had to say, what do you think that should happen with that money?
Right, it's a huge deal, right? And so I was trying to do my research, like, where does this money come from, right? Because $95 billion is a lot of
For
money.
you and me.
No, exactly. But
Yeah.
but where does it come from? Did it come from some of the stimulus money? Did it come from these sorts of, like, what taxes? What brought about this money specifically, and what funneled it in? And so I think that when it comes down to, like, how do we spend it, we should be spending it on community infrastructure. And when I say community infrastructure, I don't just mean roads and bridges. I also mean things like supporting our schools. Our schools are lacking. They don't have supplies, they don't have staffing, they don't have just so many things. Our cities, we don't have staffing, we don't have training, we don't have the support we need. And what does that translate to? That means that our people, our community members, do not have that support. As someone that has been in city government for a while now, I understand just how much, like, especially our small cities, are crunching the numbers to figure out where they get either food distribution money or painting a mural or any of these sorts of things when it comes to COVID, is testing and vaccination clinics and things like that, right? And so we should be allocating that funding right back into community, into building out infrastructure that's supportive of our community. And I think that goes into schools. I think that goes into, for example, our IHSS workers. They are working for very, very little money for many, many hours, and that means that our communities don't get quality care. Our seniors that are at home that need someone to take care of them don't have someone taking care of them, right? Things like that. And that also means funding things like greener economy. That means funding things like electric cars for our low-income communities, because things like electric vehicles and tax credits come after you purchase the car, which means people like my parents is the example I would just give, cannot afford that on the front end. That means they don't engage. That means they are the ones paying the higher gas tax, right? Versus the folks that can afford the electric car.
Now you just mentioned that. And what is your position on the gas tax, for example? I mean, you know, it impacts the lower socioeconomic folks a lot more, obviously, proportionately than others. So what's your position on the gas tax? And right now you have the legislators not fighting, they're disagreeing with the governor on how to give, rebates back to regarding the gas on it. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah, so in terms of the gas tax specifically, I wouldn't be interested in repealing it. But that goes back to my previous answer. I think that repealing a gas tax isn't going to be the answer for our communities. I think that what we should be looking to is funding actual programs for our communities that gets them away from oil, from gas, and puts them into vehicles that supports them in the future, because whether we like it or not, that's where we're going. We already know that the new vehicles that are going to be sold in a few years from now are going to be electric. So what does that mean? We have to be transitioning our communities over. That means that we should be funding it. Not just saying, you have to do this, Californians, or else you're not going to be ready, but actually funding it for low-income Californians, and that includes people in our communities here.
So what would you say to that, to the folks that say, look, we understand that and we want a better future, but right now we just, we got to pay gasoline,
right.
and we got inflation, we got all this high cost of living. How do we survive here?
And that's what I was going to say. It's not just the gas tax.
Yeah.
It's inflation overall. It's the cost of goods. It's the cost of things that we buy at the store that has people hurting. And so when it comes down to the money that we're talking about, right, $400 is one of the, I would say, major
Right,
ideas.
one of the ones, I think the governor mentioned
$400
that,
per vehicle. That doesn't reach everyone. That doesn't reach our communities that are most impacted by inflation, because the reality is that the people that are, have the least amount of money, have the least amount of, I would say, just goods, valued goods, probably don't have a car. They're probably taking a bicycle to work, and so they would not get that $400 rebate.
No, they get it if they own a car. I think that's the governor's
Exactly.
saying. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
And that's what I'm speaking to, is that inflation as a whole is
Right.
what's affecting us.
Right.
It's not just the gas tax, and I think that when it comes to our government, our state government, we should be looking at the larger picture.
Elizabeth, open-ended question. What do you think makes you the best candidate?
Absolutely. I think what makes me the best candidate is that I have energy. I have the background in community organizing. I have the knowledge on the dais. I don't just lead from sitting on top of a dais and doing policy work. I lead from the ground and acknowledging that there's lived experiences in the community that should affect how we do policy. And that's how I lead. I lead in a very, not just a one-sided approach. I lead with our community. And I think that that's what's really set me apart in this race. I think that that's exactly why I have received so much support. It's the energy, it's the track record. I have a proven track record, and I'm one of the few, if not the only candidate that has a track record of doing regional advocacy, specifically around environmental justice work, around things like labor. We always call it the Vernon smell, right? there's that smell that comes over from some of the rendering plants, and that's been an issue for decades, for as long as I can remember. I'm 28, going to be turning 29, and we know that smell has always existed. But what can we do about it? What have we or have we not done about it? And that's some of the work that I've been leading. When it came down to Delta, that was a huge regional issue as well, and that's something that I led on. And I think that when we talk about someone that's going to cover from Bell Gardens, Cudahy, all the way out to La Habra, La Mirada, we need someone that takes a regional approach.
So talking about some of your initiatives, and we looked up at your website and so
Absolutely.
forth, so we kind of made ourselves prepared a little bit. So you're
It's called research.
Research.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, you're the editor of our paper, so you have to do a
not a
lot
bad
more
thing.
than that. Yeah, absolutely. So you have a couple issues: universal health care, tuition-free college. So I guess the question is, how would you propose we pay for that? I know we have a surplus right now because, for various reasons, as you mentioned. But how would you pay for these big things? Because, universal health care, that's, $400 billion a year or something like that. So how would you do
Absolutely.
that?
Great question. And everything takes money. Everything in our government takes money, whether it's small dollars or larger dollars. However, when it comes to things like, for example, universal health care and ensuring that every Californian has access to health care and can have free quality health care, it means that we're also taking off money that would be spent in the future. Californians that are unhealthy because they're unable to get healthcare access, whether it's dental care or mental health or physical health. That's where we get to get folks in the front end, and so that's one thing. We studies have shown that we are better off, even financially, if we start funding healthcare programs for folks. So that's one thing. I think the other piece is that we should be having some folks pay their fair share. As people that buy homes, we pay a certain amount of taxes on property taxes. Not we, because I'm a renter, but other folks, right? And when we talk about corporations and how long they hold on to land, they are not paying their fair share because it's been so long in the tax roll. And so, that's where we start to look at getting actual funding from our communities. It doesn't mean that you, as someone that just bought a home, are going to see increased property taxes, but it does mean, for example, a large corporation will see that because they should be paying their fair share.
Okay. How about, how would you answer, so my kids went to college, they all had skin in the game, they took student loans, all mom and dad took out student
Same
loans
here.
too. Two of my kids are still paying for their student loans. So what would you say to them where, they've been paying for 5 or 6 years and, the reducing the debt or tuition free or waiving the past student loans on there? What would you say to them on their?
Right, and
You're
again,
probably one of them
very
too.
common question.
Yeah.
I also have student debt.
Right.
I went into student debt because I went off to college,
Right.
realized it was a lot more expensive than I thought.
Yeah, of
Tuition
course.
and books add up.
Yeah.
But part of it is also acknowledging that me wanting better for you doesn't mean it's worse off for me.
Mhm.
And it's a very much a community approach that we have to look at. When it comes down to issues like universal health care, frankly, me wanting that for our community at large isn't hurting me, and isn't necessarily technically benefiting me directly. I have health care. I've been very
Right.
fortunate my whole life. My dad had a union job growing up, and so because of him, I had health care my entire life. Vision care, dental care, physical health, etc., mental health. And once I got my own job, I have all that as well. And so me saying that I want everyone else to have it doesn't mean that I won't have it. It means our
Right.
community as a whole is a better place. And that translates to tuition-free college as well. And making sure, yes, I didn't have tuition-free college despite me going to a public university, but that doesn't mean that I don't want that for other people. I think there's a very popular saying, it's not me, it's about us,
Right.
and that's where I come in and
Thank
where
you
my
for that.
vision is.
So I spent last week at PIH Downey. I was in the hospital last week, and like you, I have good health care, good health insurance and so forth. Thank goodness I had great treatment. But how would you answer those that saying, okay, I won't be able to get the same health care, I wouldn't be able to choose PIH and choose my doctor and so forth with universal health care. It's like, I want you to have better, but I don't want you to take mine away. How would you answer that?
And that's a very valid concern, absolutely. I think part of that is it's going to take a lot of conversation, and that's why I say that when I always say my job here, not only as a policymaker, but I'm an organizer by heart and trade. It's my work, but it's also what I care about, and that part of that is having community dialogue. How are we going to get there? Because we're not going to flip a switch, pass a law, sign a bill, and
Yeah.
say that tomorrow it's going to happen.
I think there
So-
was a law that was passed. It just wasn't funded, right?
Right.
We passed it a couple of years ago.
And so
Wasn't
for
signed.
us, it's like, where are we actually going to get, and how are we going to get there? That also means, again, it means quality healthcare for everyone. And how do we cover everyone? When we start talking about healthcare across the board, we start talking about prescription drugs that are more affordable for everyone,
course.
which is a huge deal. I can't count how many people I know go down to Tijuana to get either insulin or something.
We're having this conversation. It's unbelievably, ridiculously expensive. My son is a type 1 diabetic. He's been at it since he
Yeah.
was 12 years old. So at the beginning of the year, before we meet our deductibles for the insulin, he's 22 years old right now,
Right.
and it's like $6,000 in January. It's like, so who can afford this? I mean, we're blessed and we saved and everything else because we've always known that we're going to have to be paying for, but it's crazy. And I said, how does somebody, I shouldn't say another family, how do they afford that? They can't afford that. I mean, we can't afford it, but we have to. So that's the
Exactly.
scary part. I mean, just on insulin, which he needs to live as a type 1 diabetic.
Right, and that's exactly why it goes back to, it's not about me, it's the we. And how do we make sure that we take care of each other? Frankly, I know that I'm very progressive, and so I think that a lot of conservatives see my platform and they may not agree. But I think I also have a lot of Republican supporters because they recognize that it's not just the me, it's the we, and going to that sort of thinking and talking about the actual issues that matter. It's not just saying healthcare as a whole, but like, let's get down to the nitty gritty. It's about the insulin. My mom is a type 2 diabetic. When she switched jobs, that meant that her insulin was going to go up from $12 to $280.
Yeah.
And so we started having the conversation. Well, I have a passport. I guess I can drive down to Tijuana every
That's
few
crazy.
weeks.
We shouldn't
And
have to do that. We
exactly.
shouldn't have to do that.
We live
Yeah.
in the United States, which should be taking care of its people.
These are, conversations that are happening across the state, across the country, and we should be having these conversations because there's, it's impacting so many people. Elizabeth, we want to thank you for coming on our show. We want to give you an opportunity to give an outgoing message, speak directly to the voters.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. Voters, it's your opportunity to have the chance to elect someone new to the seat. That means that it's going to be the person that takes care of you probably for the next decade or so, which means we have to really look at the issues. I'm someone that decided to run because I care about our community. I'm someone that's authentically compassionate about our communities, whether it's Cudahy or Bell or Bell Gardens, Downey, or all the way over in La Habra, La Mirada, and Norwalk. And as I knock on doors, I get to meet lots of people. I hope to meet all of you as well, and I hope to earn your support as well as your next Assembly member.
Great. Well, we sure appreciate you coming in. I think everybody learns having the dialogue and having the dialogue with you today. So we really do appreciate you coming in.
And we appreciate you being honest because I know there's many politicians who don't share their platforms. They're very ambiguous about it. So we want to thank you for being so open and accessible and being with us.
And so our folks on there listening in and watching on there, we want to thank you for tuning in. I think you got to see a good representation of who she would be as your elected official. And I think now you're able to make an informed decision. And, we sure appreciate her coming in, just like we do all the other candidates. So, again, stay informed. Election's only a few weeks away. Very important, no matter what you do, that you are informed of the candidate, the issues, who's going to represent us on there.
And vote.
And vote. Yeah, absolutely. There's no excuse now. You got your ballots in the mail. It's easy to do. I still like voting in person because I know I want my sticker and my photo, okay? But I think we got the sticker in the mail this time too.
Yeah.
But anyways, folks, thank you for listening and tuning in. This is Talking Downey with Mario
And Eric.